All right, guys. So, welcome to another episode of the Perfect podcast. And today we've got an inspirational guy, such a legend. First of all, I'll say I'm honored to have you on as a guest. Now, before I talk about who it is, I will tell you a little bit about who this person is, their career, and all the success they've achieved before we get into the story, like I normally do. So, he's a proud First Nations Aboriginal man born in Cowra, raised in Wagga, New South Wales, Australia, played in the National Rugby League for South Sydney Rabbitohs, Penrith Panthers and Canterbury Bulldogs before switching to professional boxing in 2009. He's a two times WBF World Junior Welterweight Champion and recently won the WBC Asia Continental title. Although forging a successful professional coaching career, he's battled the majority of his life with suicidal ideation and bipolar disorder. After a suicide attempt in 2012, he felt his purpose was to help people who struggle with mental illness. Through customized workshops, he talks of dealing with adversity, struggles, resilience, addiction, connection, emotional well-being, and healing trauma in schools, communities, correctional services, sporting clubs, and workplaces. So, guys, I would like to introduce Joe Williams too. How you going, mate?
I'm doing well, brother. How are you?
I'm amazing, and like I just said, then I'm honoured. I know you're a busy guy, and I know we're in circumstances where we're obviously in isolation at the moment. But I'm totally honoured to get you on board. I mean, I've seen some of the stuff that you've done in this space. I'm kind of just kind of new in the mental health sector space, and it's such a passion of mine because I lost a mate to suicide. So to hear your story and how you've come through adversity and what you do and help other people is just inspirational, mate.
Yeah, it's you look back as a kid, right, and you're like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And everything I wanted to be was a footy player, and I thought that that was my journey and so forth. If you sat back and asked me 30 years ago, do you think you'll ever be a mental health speaker and travel around the world inspiring people, talking about prevention of suicide? I'd be like, what? No way in the world would I do that, So it's just amazing how you sit back and you follow the path, really, and where you end up, where it leads you to. And I don't push my belief onto anyone, but I'm a massive believer that everything happens for a reason at the exact point in your life that it's supposed to happen. And it's all sort of drawn us to this point tonight. And I'm lucky enough to be able to get out to communities and essentially share stories.
Yeah.
And what that looks like and what that means, I guess we'll delve into a little bit later. But people think that I just go out and I tell my story, and I've been doing this for 6 years now, but it's not, whilst it's my story that I guess people connect to and helps people to relate in certain ways, but it's the other stories that I tell that has been the biggest, most influential moments in my healing journey.
Yeah. So as it goes, so I touched on a little bit there about your story. Can we take it back from the beginning? I like to, as I say, when people are in the public eye and they've got this public persona that people think they know them, I like to unravel all that and go back to the beginning and just what makes you tick and where this sense of you had this NRL career, you had everything that you wanted, money. And as we always see, when people project this kind of perception or judgment on people that do from the outward look like they've got everything, when did it kind of start unraveling in your mindset for you with kind of self-hate? And I know that's what you've touched upon in your book.
For me and my stories, it's a little bit different. I struggled with this stuff for a large majority of my life. And how the story goes, I relate back to two really significant things happened to me at the age of 13. At the age of 13, I had up to 5 NRL clubs, National Rugby League clubs, knocking on mum and dad's door to try and sign me as a young kid. Showed some ability as a young footy player, and for me, I was lucky that that's everything I wanted to be. Everything I wanted to be was like the guys playing footy on TV, So, and I do everything I possibly could to be that. My dad played in the NRL, which was the Winfield Cup back then. How's that a national sport named after a cigarette company, right? How far we've come. But, I look at everything that I wanted to be was a rugby league player. I showed some ability in that. I had all these NRL clubs trying to sign me as a young fella. And, out of all the clubs that come and knocked on mum and dad's door, it was the conversation that changed. And mum and dad said to every club that knocked on the door, we don't care about footy. We don't care about what you can do for this kid as a rugby league player. What we care about is his education. Now, being a young Aboriginal boy at the time, Aboriginal family, it's well documented that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, or First Nation people of this country, our education rates, our numeracy and literacy are lower than non-Indigenous people and the national average. So mum and dad changed the conversation around not about footy. They're like, because dad played in the NRL, so dad was like, it can be all over in a heartbeat. So we want to make sure that this kid gets a good education, because you get a good education, you're going to get a good job. You get a good job, you get more money. You get more money, you can provide for your family. And again, looking at the rates with First Nation people, again, well below the poverty line across the country. We knew that being able to provide for family was one of the most important things, and to break a cycle. So that first negotiation in contracts wasn't about footy, it was about schooling. So the club would give our boy the best education's getting him. And through that, as a 13-year-old kid, I saw my first scholarship contract that paid for my entire schooling, which was far greater than any gift that I could ever get, because a good education has enabled me to string a few words together, to be able to be the author of not only my own autobiography but contributed to multiple books, and hold a sentence down. I'm thankful, so thankful that I was educated well, and mum and dad put that in my first contract. And I talk about the two things that happened as a 13-year-old. There was signing that contract, but the other thing that happened as a young person, and knowing the research now around head trauma, around concussions, and the impact of the brain that contact sport has. I had a fairly severe concussion at a young age, and which I don't know if you've had a concussion, but anyone who've had a concussion will be able to relate to this. On the back of my first concussion, it started a dialogue in my head that put on a hell of a lot of self-doubt. Now, when you have a concussion, it second guesses, it questions everything. It's like somebody else is sitting inside your head talking to you. For me, it wasn't just about the conversation that was happening in my head. That conversation was extremely negative, and it started to plant thoughts, ideas, and plans of suicide. So for me, I've had this inner dialogue, this conversation, which I say is like a voice, like a physical person sitting inside my head that has told me and plotted and planned my suicide every single day since I was the age of about 13. So every single day, thoughts, ideas, plans of suicide, no matter what I'm doing, no matter where I'm going, I can have this. It's a thought process, right? But I call it like a voice, okay? But I'm not diagnosed with schizophrenia, so for me, it's not a physical voice. But it's like, I say this to anyone, you've got a dialogue that's inside your head. Everyone's got a dialogue that's inside their head that tells them they're hungry, that tells them they're late, that tells them they look good in the mirror. It's just that the dialogue inside my head was extremely negative, and second guessed, questioned, and doubted every move, decision, conversation, everything that I had, and told me to end my life. And that has happened every day, still to this day, for a massive proportion of my life, as I said, a young teenager. Now, early days, I didn't know what it was. I didn't know. I just thought everyone went through it. But for me as well, at that age, you can imagine young fella coming, going through school, just signed an NRL contract as a 13-year-old kid, year 7 at school, year 8, year 9, you're starting to get some attention around, the media, around all sorts of things. But also, if I've signed a contract at that age, there's every chance that I could play footy all right. Mm-hmm. So at a young age, a very young age, I was playing in the men's competition. So from the age of 13, 14, 15-year-old, I was playing against men on the weekend. I wasn't playing against kids my own age.
Yeah.
So I went from under 13s, playing against 13-year-old kids, and then when I was supposed to be under 14s, I was playing in the under 18s competition, and then coming off the bench playing in the first grade competition against men every weekend. Now, with that, obviously comes the old initiation test of, if he's good enough to be out here, he's old enough to be out here, let's see if he's tough enough to be out here. So rugby league 20 odd years ago was very different to what it is now, as far as, rugby league now is a lot faster and more athletic and fitter, faster, stronger. But back then it was fairly reckless, and if you got hit off the ball and you got hit high and you got hit late, and being a young kid, it's the old initiation test, as I said. So I copped all sorts of late shots, high shots, head shots, where constantly this rattling around of my brain was happening and was building further and further on the negative dialogue that was happening inside my head. So for me, that just spiraled out of control. Now, as young teenagers do, the only way I found at the time to silence what was going on inside my head was the old bottle. So for me, it wasn't just about being a young fella trying to sneak on, a couple of drinks at the weekend. For me, I was absolutely obliterating myself out of control, trying to silence what was happening inside my head. So for me, I didn't drink because I liked the taste of it, because I liked the way it made me feel. I drank to absolutely smash myself out of reality, because it was the only thing that silenced what was happening inside my head. Yeah. Now, again, 15, 16-year-old, getting some attention with, the local profile starting to build a bit, talking about the NRL, talking about all these sorts of things. Again, ego gets involved, and 16, 17-year-old, time to move to Sydney. Now, Sydney's like all the bright lights get turned on at once, I was living in Wagga at the time, so it's a small town. Everyone knew who I was, so I couldn't sort of go out and openly do some of the things that, young fellas get involved in, because everyone knew who I was because of the footy and the media and so forth. So when I went to Sydney, it was like I was anonymous, and these clubs don't close. Yeah. So 18-year-old, man, I'm out there drinking as much as I can. With the drinking and the bright lights of Sydney also came recreational drugs. So I would drink as much as I possibly could till I'd pass out, and then I'd take enough drugs to kill a small elephant just to keep going, and I'd party, for days. And I guess I'm fast forwarding through a little bit, but at that point, around 18-year-old, I come to as a young 20-year-old. I went originally down to the Roosters, but then I made my debut for the South Sydney Rabbitohs. And again, it was like all the lights turned on at once. I was the star of the show. I was playing as a young 20-year-old. I was having some success on the field. I signed a new contract. With that comes money, comes exposure, comes profile. Again, the ego was just, me, was out of control. But it wasn't about drinking as much as I could to get drunk. As I said, it was about silencing everything that was happening inside my head. A lot of people don't realise. I got a Facebook message sent to me today with a screenshot of what a guy put on it was a South Sydney fans page, and he was like, has anyone ever heard from Joe Williams? You know, Joe Williams had so much promise, but I heard that he had some mental health issues. And, you know, it was one of those things at the time. I got to the point where my life was extremely up and down. You know, there was the highs of playing first grade rugby league and the media and everything that comes with that. And then I would smash back down into this crater of self-loathing and pity. And then I'd play good footy again, so that I'd come up. And then I'd smash back down again. So my life was extremely sporadic and inconsistent. And again, I just thought it was just, I was a kid down on his luck with this sort of stuff, you know. But for me, the drinking and drug taking, it started to take over. And I got to a point where I looked at myself and said, I don't want to be this. You know, everything I wanted to be since I was a kid was a first grade footballer. Now I was doing that, but I was slowly watching it slip from my grasp because of the stuff I was doing off the field.
Yeah.
You know, so I made some decisions that if I'm going to improve my life, the first thing that I needed to do, because everything that was happening that was negative in my life, there was one common denominator. That common denominator was alcohol. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it just turned me into someone I didn't want to be. Now, it didn't turn me into a violent person. It didn't turn me into anything like that. It turned me, you know, I was a happy drunk. It gave me that false profile of who I thought I was. Now, if I was in second grade playing football, going out and getting on the drink and getting on the drugs would put me up on that high level again, where, you know, I was the, you know, thought I was the best dancer in the club, thought I was the, you know, the main man. And again, like, you know what comes on the other sides of drinking and drug benders for days. You know, I found myself in the room not wanting to come out for days. You know, it was one of those things. So I decided to clean my life up a bit around that, and I knew that alcohol was a massive problem in my life, and I knew that drugs were a big problem in my life. But if I didn't drink, then I wouldn't take drugs. So I initially started, and, you know, I got some help, and it was a good friend of mine introduced me to Narcotics Anonymous, and I went into the rooms of AA and NA, and I started the journey of being sober. And I'm lucky to sit here and chat to you almost 15 years without a single drop of alcohol. You know, drugs hasn't been as long as that, but still a number of years. But if I didn't get off the drink and the drugs, mate, I'd be dead or locked up. You know, that wasn't so for me, giving away that stuff was great. But what giving away alcohol and drugs did, what I was using for so long was alcohol and drugs to turn down the noise inside my head. Take away alcohol and drugs, the noise gets turned back up again. You know, so that's when I started to have a real look at, you know, what it was that I go through, and a conversation, you know, just after my career finished with some professionals. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and again, looking back at my career was extremely up and down. It's because my life was extremely up and down. You know, the relationship breakdowns, and then get back together, and then playing great footy, and then smashing down and playing bad footy. You know, it was the inconsistencies of life that again, the chemical imbalance of what bipolar disorder is, thrust me into that lifestyle. Now, I don't ever point blame to anything or anyone around that, because, you know, it's the journey that it was. And I'm thankful to now be, you know, clean and sober. And what I did was, when I gave away alcohol and drugs, also lost interest in footy, because it was, again, I gave away alcohol and drugs. Now, the only thing I had in common with my teammates was playing footy and partying. Now, I wasn't partying anymore, and I wasn't enjoying my footy anymore. So I walked away from the NRL at the end of the 2008 season, and I walked into a boxing gym. Now, for people who heard and saw that I walked into a boxing gym, probably laughed at me a little bit, because as a rugby league player, I wasn't the toughest man alive. As a rugby league player, I didn't like getting dirty on the worst of days. So, but going into a boxing gym didn't teach me how to fight physically or fight people. Going into a boxing gym taught me how to fight mentally, because the more you're working on the bag and the more you're working on the pads, and you got someone constantly in your ear saying, "Come on, Joey, just a little bit longer, just a little bit harder, just a little bit further." What that did was it started to build this mental resilience inside my head that would counteract the negative voice that was inside my head. So every time I'd step inside the ropes, not only did I have the negative thought inside my head, but I had another bloke on the other side of the ring trying to knock my teeth out. Right? So every time that I got inside the ring, I had to bite down on my mouthpiece and really fight. Now, not only fight physically, but fight mentally. And the harder I worked physically, and the fitter I became in that boxing space. And let's not forget, as a rugby league player, I wasn't a real fit guy, because I was naturally gifted with some fairly athletic ability. So boxing, I was always behind the 8 ball because I had to work hard to catch up on experience. Boxing taught me so much about me. When I searched deep inside myself as a rugby league player, I didn't like the person I found, because it was a scared little boy who liked to run and hide when things got tough. As a boxer, when I searched deep inside myself in the ring, when I searched deep inside myself, still to this day, I've still got the skills to be able to bite down and fight back in the most, horrendous wars physically, but also mentally inside my head. It helped me build a resilience outside the ring for everything that was trying to take me out mentally.
Wow. I was going to ask you before that, obviously this all started when you was 13, and I always say, because when I went through my adversity and other people I've spoke to, was there any times, but I did notice that you said you thought it was your normal. Was there any times when people started noticing and asking if you was okay? Or did you sometimes, I know you were saying that you thought it was your normal, so you may not have, but were there times when you thought this might not be normal and try and put it out to anyone?
It wasn't until I was a young adult, until, you started to look at sports psychology and that sort of stuff. Like, when people are talking, that's not actually the norm.
Yeah.
And again, but I was in a time when I was a bit of a liability as it was. I was fighting to hold my spot. So I didn't want the coach to think I was a liability. So I didn't come out and talk about it. No way. Because mental health, then you got to understand, this is back in, 2006, 2007, where for me, it was in the National Rugby League, a sport that's, that has a bit of a drinking culture with professional men's sport. It was odd for me to give up the drink. And then if I come out and say, "Hey, I've got voices inside my head trying to tell me to kill myself," I just wasn't ready to take that risk at the time. Should I have done it? Yeah, 100% I should have done it, because I knew that the minute I started to get help, the minute I started to talk about what it was that I was going through mentally and emotionally, was the day I started to heal.
Yeah, because sometimes you obviously see these days in the newspapers a lot more sports players that were very big in the 90s and early 2000s and now coming out, and they're getting rehab and they're getting help for depression and anxiety and things like this. So it's obviously apparent that back in those days it wasn't something, it was almost taboo to talk about.
But I'll pose another question to you as well. Like, you have a look at that we're talking about, that these players in the late 90s and the early 2000s, that are on the other side of their career now, for a good decade or even longer. Again, all the research around impact and injury of the brain causes, these these heightened moods, these excessive behaviours. So have you seen the film Concussion with Will Smith? It talks about an illness, a brain disease called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is more or less traumatic injury of the brain, which causes I guess in layman's terms, a protein to build on the brain, which the brain thinks it's trying to heal itself. But whilst it's got this protein or this protective layer, the messaging struggles to get through, right? And then what happens then is that's when, the severe mental health issues start to creep in on the life, because, players are their memory's impacted, and again, all around these excessive behaviours, and the ups and downs of mania. And again, when we're talking about excessive behaviours, we're talking about alcohol and drugs and stuff to hide away what's really happening inside our brain. So there's more research and more understanding that's happening about that now, and loads more players that are donating their brain for research, post death and that sort of stuff. The horrendous thing about CTE is that it can't be diagnosed until post death.
Yeah.
And there's significant number of NFL players that have gone down that path, and then just recently as well, AFL greats, NRL greats have had their brain looked at, which has shown up some signs of CTE. So it's a dangerous sport, but would I give it all back? No way. And then rugby league was tough and impacting on my brain, but then I get into boxing, and boxing I say was a massive contributor to building my strength and resilience.
Yeah.
But it also has physically had some impairment and impact on, the things that I go through from day to day now.
You've been doing this for a while now, 6 years. You've been doing your talks and you've been helping. I just want to take you back to when you finally got that help. So for anybody out there that maybe thinking about it, when you got that help, did it feel, and I always ask this question, did it feel like a weight off your shoulders that you were sharing it? And then how did people, other masculine, male-dominated industry like yours that you've been in boxing and that, how did they respond to it? Was it better than you thought? Because a lot more people put that pressure on themselves that they daren't go through and tell anyone in the fear of judgment. What was you...
So look at, if my life was compartmentalized, I guess, you look at rugby league career, boxing career, pre and post suicide attempt. So I had an attempt on my life in 2012 where there was some boxing fights pre that, and then there was some boxing fights post that. So again, it's been an ongoing journey with that. And when we talk about getting help, some of the biggest helps for me has been just talking about it. Just normalizing the conversation around mental health and well-being as well. But I've got to say, for me, and what I've noticed with a lot of, especially First Nation community, I'm an Aboriginal man, and I grew up knowing I was an Aboriginal man. But if you look at me, I was too black to be white and too white to be black. I didn't fit in either world. So there was a struggle with my identity around that as well. And going through that process later in my life, where there was a point where I grew up knowing that I was Aboriginal, but then I went to Sydney in the big machine and the big machine of the NRL and the city itself. I moved away from what an Aboriginal boy from the bush looked like, mentally and emotionally and physically, to this big machine that I was trying to fit into that didn't work for me. And then, going through my identity issues later in my life and actually finding out that my identity is more about my behaviors in community rather than what I look like, I started to heal. And again, you're looking at, whether it be skin color, it's the impact of colonization has had a massive impact on First Nations people as not only what we look like, but again, the trauma impacted on our communities, which a lot of communities, you have a look at behaviors, and whilst they may look like mental health behaviors, a lot of communities, it's the impact of trauma that we've been generationally inherited, and the impact of, again, living in two worlds that we struggle to fit in, which is, as First Nation people, we are extremely spiritual people. A close elder of mine that I hold very dearly to my journey and my healing, he said to me, "You're not mentally ill. I don't care what anyone says to you. You're not mentally ill. You're spiritually ill. And the minute you start to heal your spirit will be the minute things come good for you." For me, that's what's impacted and worked for me more than anything.
And I love that. We spoke about that briefly the other day, because the journey that I've been on myself, and this is what I mean when we spoke about it a little bit. There's a side that you can go down the medical professionals when it's medicated and things like that, which can work to an extent. But then the other side, like you say, the spiritual side and the holistic approach, where you actually get to the root of the problem. So for you to say that, then it is something in that. And the amount of people that have spoken, it's not just in Australia, but in LA when I've been doing this campaign, and everyone that's been through severe adversity has come to that similar notion of being told through an holistic approach that, yes, you can go down the route of doing medication. There's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, we need to fix the problem in here as well. So,
well, I don't openly say it. I don't openly say it and publicly, and I'm mindful of the words that I do say, because different people are in different parts of their journey. But for me, medication kept me alive, right? Without a doubt, medication kept me alive and had a massive impact on who I was in my healing. But if I'm honest and brutally honest, medication was a Band-Aid that fixed a sore, but it didn't heal the root problem. Right? So I haven't been medicated for a number of years as well now. So for me, getting off medication and putting this different holistic healing approach in, I still very much have bipolar disorder, except for me, I had the notion of, what would my ancestors have done when they didn't have chemists and doctors and that Western approach of medication and pharmaceuticals, what they would have done, but there's also the conversation around, there wasn't mental illness pre-colonization as well. That's another story, but and there wasn't suicide pre-colonization as well. But what I got back to that story was, my old people, the ancestors, would have exercised a hell of a lot. They would have ate well, and when if they were in certain times of heightened well-being, or what I would call mania, again, which wouldn't have happened back then, but what would I refer to, what would the old people have done? They would have meditated. And there's certain cultural practice around meditation, ancient mindfulness practices that date back thousands and thousands of years. So I went on that journey, and it took me a while to come off medication. And initially it wasn't about, hey, I want to get off medication. Initially it was, I was talking with my doctor about it, and it was, hey, I'm going to go on a different medication. He wanted to put me on a different medication, but then when I got off it completely, because I had to come down from one to get on another, when I got off it completely, I went, you know what, I'm doing all right. But I'm going to make some promises to myself and to the people around me to keep an eye on me, that if things start to head south, I've got to go back to the doctor and start to get some medication again. But again, I made an effort, a concerted effort, to put the real attention into, the old practices: eating well, exercising, mindfulness, meditation. These cultural practices that kept us well. And again, I alluded to earlier stories. Right now, what a lot of people don't realize is that in this story, in this country, First Nations people around our culture, there was a hell of a lot of stories, dreamtime stories. A lot of people talk to them about, or dreaming stories. Our old dreaming stories right across the country had values and lessons that underpin the story. What underpinned those stories were lessons around humility, lessons around love and care and respect and compassion and taking care of one another. And that's what I do now. I don't only go around and talk about my story. I go around and talk about them old stories, the ones that have been handed down to us for thousands of years.
So that leads me to the next question, because that's powerful stuff in itself. What made you do that transition then to go, right, I've got a message and I want to share these stories and go and make a difference? Because now you've been awarded some high accolades for your work in mental health. What prompted you to make that move?
And again, that's over a number of years too. So it's how you evolve as a person. Again, you educate yourself more, and I'm someone who does a stack load of reading, and I've done some work around trauma recovery and at uni and that sort of stuff. So again, I'm constantly trying to educate myself to not only better other people but better me, to help me be the best version of me. But it was in the very first session I started speaking back in 2014. Did some lights come on for people? And I guess what drove to that was, when The Enemy Within was launched, it was around a short film that I'm super thankful that the lady who produced and put that together, that she actually encouraged me to speak about this journey, because this was a secret that I'd hidden for many years. And I'm probably jumping all over the place and so forth, but it was on the back of that film being made public. Did a lot of people start coming up to me and saying, "Hey, Joe, you know what you're talking about? I go through the same." And the more people that come up to me and said, "I go through the same," and hearing you as a former NRL player, again, these sports people that get looked at like, they're invincible, mentally, emotionally. But also the week that The Enemy Within was launched, the short film, and then my organisation, was the week leading into my defence of the WBF world title. So here's this guy who's just about to fight for a boxing title, coming out saying that he's had depression his entire sporting career, a large part of his life, and that he tried to end his life. Now, this is back in 2014, where people didn't speak about it like they speak about it now. So it was a big deal. And living in a small town and being a profile person, I was back living in Wagga, being a profile person with sport. And again, it was the week of that fight. People started coming up to me everywhere. And the more I started to connect with that and started to talk in, schools and so forth, and the more it made me realize that there's so many people out here hurting. There's so many people that are just struggling in silence, that don't have the confidence. People were saying to me at the start, "That's so brave for you to talk about it." And I'm like, you know what? And this is no disrespect to anyone else, but I said, in my opinion, it's not brave. It's just the right thing to do. and starting to show myself and the vulnerabilities that I had, and connected with people. And people were like, if this dude can do it, then maybe I can start to talk about it too. And then I got to a dangerous place again, because I was taking on everyone's problems that they couldn't speak about for so long, and I didn't know how to protect my spirit and how to protect myself mentally and emotionally. And I was constantly giving. And, as they say, you can't give from an empty cup. I ended up back inside the psych ward, for the second time. And that's when I said, if I'm going to do this, I've got to start to look after myself too. And from that, I started working around schools across the country. The opportunity come up to go and work with Kevin Hines across in the US. And I was based in Atlanta for a while over there, going between the US and back here in Australia. And then, it was on my stint over in the US. And again, that same elder that had that conversation with me, he said to me, who's got the highest suicide rates in the world? And I said, our people do back home. And he said, well, tell me what you're doing over there. If your people are dying more than anyone back here in Australia, do you have a responsibility to them? And I said, I'm on the next plane home.
Wow.
I've gone overseas with my book launch and so forth like that. My priority now is around the healing of communities here in Australia. And again, Aboriginal communities that are struggling and are dispossessed and that are below the poverty line and are doing their best to navigate through generation on top of generation of trauma, that they're struggling to stay afloat. So it's about going out and empowering, and my direction a little bit has changed from going out and speaking about mental health to looking at the root cause of a lot of the mental health issues in Aboriginal communities is the generational trauma that we're born with.
And I love that. It's the front line. That's what I admire the most. I have so much respect for huge organizations and things like that, but when people are on the front line and they're going into the communities, and there's the caseworkers that deal with people with mental health issues daily, and they see it all, and there's people like yourself that are going out there and just getting amongst the communities, to me, that's just so inspirational.
Well, I can't sit back and watch. I can't sit back and try and affect change if I'm doing it behind a computer.
Exactly.
I'm out in community, and I'm in over 50 and 60 different communities a year. 300 plus days on the road, wiping the tears out of people's faces. And sitting there and giving some respect to the pain that they're going through, and really helping them to normalize the conversation that is happening with them, but not only just talk about, because going out to communities and sharing my story, although it's something that we can connect to, but I think we're at a point now where we need to share more about healing techniques, because whilst in 2014, when no one spoke about it, or I didn't know of anyone speaking about it, in communities, it was a way to connect to people and to help them to understand their pain and to know that they weren't alone. But now that we know that, what we're doing is we're probably going out and we're sharing vicariously our own pain into communities. And there's countless young people that I connect with, and they're like, I want to be a mental health speaker. I've got a story. And I'm like, yeah, I'm stoked that you want to help people, and I'm really sorry that you've got a story, but I'm more interested in how you heal.
Yeah.
I'm more interested in how you can impact other people in a positive way, because sharing your story again, is just about sharing your pain. So from day dot that I was out in communities, people were saying, oh, it's amazing that you're sharing your story. But from day dot, for me, it was about sharing the techniques that helped me get well.
Yeah.
From a young kid at 13 with voices inside his head telling him to die.
Yeah.
It wasn't about sharing my story and my pain and what I went through. It was about sharing how I learnt to manage that in those tough times. That's the conversation I think that we've got to change at the moment.
See, I agree wholeheartedly. One of the things that has actually come from this campaign, and don't get me wrong, like, I'm obviously very grateful. There's a lot of public figures that's come forward and shared the story, which has created that awareness. But from it, I've been asked by a lot of people to come in and do talks, and I've turned every single one down because my head is exactly what you just said there. I am more than happy to go and introduce it, but we need either clinical psychologists or professionals that can then teach us how to positively maneuver our way and learn it. So you just hit.
So that was where my journey was, around educating myself around trauma and the impacts and how to heal trauma and that sort of stuff as well. But in the beginning, for me, it was about sharing my story, but it was also about normalizing the story and being the conduit for young people who don't feel confident in going to the school counsellor.
Yeah.
Right. So it was about me normalizing that to them and saying, hey, listen, I got help. And, it really helped me. So if I can get some help, I think you should too.
Yeah.
So for me, a long period of the time was about being the conduit between the people and the professional.
Yeah.
That's what a lot of people don't get. I ain't going in there to communities just sharing my story and making everyone feel sorry for me. It ain't about that.
Yeah.
It's about trying to help people. And I'll 100% talk about my holistic journey and how I do that. So for me, it's like, if you're going through a tough time, start to have a look at some of the behaviors in your life. Start to distance yourself from negative influences, negative behaviors. Put the alcohol down if that's an impact on your life. Clean your diet up and get out there and exercise. All right. And, add some mindfulness and some meditation and do some stuff that really impacts your well-being in a positive manner. All right. And if that ain't working, then it's time to have a bigger conversation, with some people who know and study the brain and understand it, So again, it's about, I'll 100% share the things that help me get well, but I'm not everyone else either. Yeah. So what helped me might not help other people.
Exactly.
Right? So I just say, these are the things that I do. These are things that I continue to do still to this day. And if it's working for me, I'll put more of it in there, So, and again, it ain't about trying to beat what it is I go through. It's about just trying to manage it to keep me well and alive.
Yeah. And I think that's just it there. You just, people can have so much respect for you because it's the transparency and you're so authentic with it. Like, you don't hide the facts, you don't, and that's the whole notion in normalizing the conversation, isn't it? There's nothing to be fearful in sharing your story to get help and just keep on trying. Like you say, I always say, it's like training the body, which you did, is like training the mind. What works for one person will never work for the other. So just keep on trying.
I sat with a young group and these are some young fellows that started a group around mental health awareness and helping other young men connect to each other that are going through tough times and I sat there and I listened to all of them and I said, lads, with respect, each of you spoke for half an hour to 45 minutes and you didn't tell me once about how you got well. You didn't tell me once about implementing positive things in your life. You just shared with me all of your pain. So is this about you helping other people or is this about you getting it off your chest?
Yeah.
So we have to have a look at what it is that we're doing, but more importantly, why we're doing it. For me, again, from day one, it was always about people connected with me. It helped them to feel good. So I want to help people feel good. So it was about trying to share, not my story, but my tips to get well, right? My wellness package to get well in community. And I think maybe the media, I won't say can be blamed, but the way that everything was reported was about Joe Williams is going around sharing his story, and that's all people got.
Yeah.
He's going around sharing his story. So I've got a story too. So maybe I can share my story and then I'm going to help people. It's a little bit more intricate than that. It's about, again, I ask people, why do you want to do it? Do you want to do it to get it off your chest, or do you want to do it to help other people? Because if you're just sharing your pain, it ain't about them. It's about you.
Yeah, totally agree with you. Well, I wanna obviously thank you. Honoured that you came on to chat. We've been chatting for a good hour now, mate. Could chat to hours for you. And after this, obviously, there's a lot of things that I've taken away that really could be implemented. Obviously, you know about the campaign and what its aims have been, and it's never been about me sharing my story. That's why you'll never really see me on the campaign. But yeah, some of the things that I just took away from you that just can be implemented in that sort of stuff. But what is next for yourself? Obviously, we're in isolation mode at the moment. So where can people find out more information about you? And obviously your book, The Enemy Within, where can they pick it up from?
I'm sitting actually at my desk, in my son's room, and he's got a picture of, that's like that, right? There. Defying the Enemy Within, that's all available on my website and stuff like that, and you can get me at joewilliams.com.au. But what's next? What's next is most important for me, because, the last 18 months has been a difficult change. I've had this sort of cloud over the top of my head that I didn't know what I was doing, where I was going, and I wanted to impact bigger and better and, and broader around communities. And it just come to me one day, and I'm thankful that it did. And I wrote a trauma recovery program that I'm looking to implement into Dubbo, and we're going to pilot it in Dubbo first, out where I live. And we're still going through, negotiations and so forth of what and where that looks like. And then obviously the isolation factor, we're struggling with that at the moment. But for me, it's more about trauma recovery, and what's next for me is about looking at that program and making some real change in communities. I've started doing some work with an out-of-home care organisation, which is dealing with young people with complex trauma. That and again, looking to if we're going to heal behaviours, we're going to heal the thing that's causing the behaviours, which triggers the trauma. And it's just a really difficult time at the moment for everyone. But in all honesty, brother, I ain't finding it that difficult, because I'm someone who could stay in my house and not speak to anyone every single day of the week. And people say, well, what do you mean? Like, you've been in the public eye with professional sport for a long time, and now you go out and speak to thousands of people a week. What do you mean? I like my own company. I'm never lonely, because I've got 3 or 4 bloody people talking to me upstairs in my head anyway. So for me, I'm using this time to be creative and to do some more writing. And I'm writing, as I said, I'm writing a chapter of a book, which is directed at social workers, working with Aboriginal communities. But also, I said on my social media that there was 3 words that I want people to start to have a look at during this time of what we call this pandemic or crisis. And that's to adapt, innovate, and grow. For me, I'm adapting to the situation. I'm innovating by writing new content, new programs, looking at different things, doing podcasts with people, starting my own podcast. But also, man, when you innovate, you grow, right? So for me, it's this time of struggle, of uncertainty, it isn't new, you know, and it isn't new for me. It isn't new for a lot of Aboriginal communities because we have a hell of a lot of uncertainty in our life. You know, as I said, you know, a large proportion of our communities are below the poverty line. You know, so we're many communities are you know, doing their best to battle as it is. You know, so this unfortunately isn't nothing new. You know, it's a time to. I'm seeing some positives in it. It's a time to connect with family. As I said, 300 plus days on the road. I'm never home. But the last 3 months I've been home, you know, so it's great for me. You know, I'm loving it. I'm enjoying it. And, you know, the new world of connecting with people like you online, being able to do things and chat with people, you know, via Zoom and, you know, virtually, that sort of stuff. If it's the new, I don't mind it so much because, as I said, I'm using it as an innovation for my next step. Stay tuned.
Well, mate, I say total respect to you. You're doing some amazing stuff and you're helping people along the way. So, again, I appreciate you. Thank you for being a part of the podcast and chatting, mate.
Anytime, brother. And you know, shoot me through the links and so forth, and I'll share them around on my socials as well, just to, you know, to get it out there a bit more.
Amazing, mate. Well, thank you. And guys, you can download this on Spotify or iHeartRadio. I'll also be dropping a link through the YouTube channel as well.